There have been a number of large-scale anti-Trump rallies over in the U.S. in recent days, and on Press Perspective today, we touch upon these protests, including their intentions and broader implications. Hello and welcome to Press Perspective for this Thursday, June 19th here in Seoul. I'm Min Sunhee. Today we turn our attention to public protests over in the U.S. following our own fair share of demonstrations after our short-lived martial law late last year. Now for more on this, I have Ruy Valdes with Spanish news agency EFE Spain here in the studio. Ruy, as always, welcome back.
Nice to be here.
I also have Jessica Stone, an independent journalist over in the U.S., joining us virtually. Jessica, thank you so much for making time to join us live.
Good evening.
Right, Jessica, LA, it has recently become the epicenter, if you will, of tensions with the Trump administration over deportation plans. Let's begin with a timeline of the public protests in LA. What started them, and are people still taking to the streets there?
Well, just on Tuesday, we had Karen Bass, the mayor there, decide to end the curfew that she had implemented back on June 10th when the riots really began to escalate. This all goes back to June 7th and through 10th, it goes back to June 6th after a series of these immigration raids throughout Southern California, which sort of whipped up a backlash of people who said, we need to protest these are not right, these are not constitutional. And they went to the government buildings, and you're seeing that in the video there. And that just began to build and build, and some of it get out of hand. At this point, there have been 500 arrests made in connection with these protests after vandalism and of government buildings covering about a 21 square kilometer part of Los Angeles. So it's important to note that this is not a wide scale set of protests that was occurring in Los Angeles. At this point, most of it is no longer occurring. But again, this is a small part of LA, the downtown part of LA, a 21 square kilometer part of this city of immigrants reacting to these mass immigration raids in Southern California.
Right, and speaking about those raids, Jessica, broadly speaking, are these raids on with regard to farms, hotels and restaurants? There was a bit of confusion about whether the ICE raids were also going to target them.
Yes, we call that whiplash, and it's not uncommon with this administration and the direction from the president by social media. So at one point, he had reacted over the weekend to the idea that this was really hurting farmers and major farm operations, hurting hospitality industries, because 14% of undocumented workers are in construction and farming, 7% are in hospitality, and there was a mass reaction from these businesses. By Monday, that had switched back to the immigration raids are on. That coming from the direction of the Homeland Security Department via the Twitter account that they have, where they said there will be no safe spaces for industries who harbor violent criminals or purposely try to undermine ICE's efforts, ICE being the Immigration, Customs and Enforcement part of the Department of Homeland Security. And I should add, Border Patrol has released 0 undocumented immigrants into the U.S. in May. This was another evidence that they are providing to talk about how there's a contrast between this administration and the Biden administration, saying that they are not releasing the immigrants that they pick up during these raids, whereas the previous administration did.
Jessica, with regard to the public protests, what can you tell us about the demographics of the demonstrators? I mean, who are the people partaking in the LA protests?
Well, I think this is very interesting and important to point out, because Los Angeles is a city of immigrants, not just Hispanic immigrants, but Asian immigrants, Pacific Islanders, Native Hawaiians. In fact, out of the 3.9 million people who live there, more than 35% are foreign born. So this is a really visceral, emotional issue. And I should point out, too, that 1 out of 5 Los Angeles children live with an undocumented family member or an undocumented parent. or they are undocumented themselves. So this is very real, very visceral, very personal to many of the people of Los Angeles. They're also overwhelmingly young. Most of them are under the age of 40, and they don't necessarily, I should point out as well that they don't all fit the profile, in this case, of those who were arrested. The people who were arrested, many of them, police say, are professional rioters. So I don't want to indicate or implicate that the people of Los Angeles are among those arrested, but it does point out that so many of the protests, the reaction to this policy, really, really personal to the people of LA.
Right. Ruy, for the sake of clarity, let's expand on something that Jessica touched upon. How many undocumented immigrants are there in the U.S., and what makes the U.S. such a desired destination?
Yes, as of mid-2023, around 13.7 million of undocumented immigrants were registered or counted in living in the U.S. This represents 27% of all the country foreign-born population. It's interesting that lately, since 2019, this figure has increased dramatically, perhaps because of Venezuela immigration increased a lot, and another type of undocumented immigrants that were seeking for asylum. There's shifting origins of these immigrants. Before, Mexicans were largely the undocumented immigrant population, but now, in the last 10 years, only 19% are Mexican. And if you integrate Central America and South America, those will be the majority over the last 10 years. Many Central Americans are fleeing gang violence, insecurity, and fragile economies, and looking in the U.S. like a better standard of life. There's also a new profile of unauthorized entry. Before, still most part of it, but before there was a large quantity of immigrants that crossed through Mexico, walking or through buses in a very dangerous manner. Now it has shifted a lot, that they have seen that many undocumented immigrants are overstayed tourists that have a student visa or working visa that decide to stay in the country. And some, like I mentioned, are looking for asylum or amnesty. Another very important point is that most undocumented immigrants are long settled. Nearly half of all foreign-born individuals have lived in the U.S. for more than 20 years. This means that whenever these ICE raids are being made, they're separating or deporting people that have very well-established lives in U.S. And just to put things in perspective, why it's important, or why immigrants want to migrate to the U.S., we can start in remittances to put these things in perspective. In Mexico, remittances reached $62.5 billion in 2024. That's equal to 3.7% of Mexico's GDP. In Guatemala and Haiti, they represent 19%, and in Nicaragua and Honduras, up to 26%. Mentioning Venezuela, some estimates say 35% of households there depends on remittances to live. So this is basically the landscape of undocumented immigration.
Right. Ruy, do you suppose the Trump administration's immigration policies have perhaps affected or changed Mexican migrants' perception of the U.S.?
Yes. I will start with something, then I will connect it. Just to, and again, to put things in perspective, in terms of numbers, Trump is still far behind what Obama, the numbers Obama deported. This number, it's official, but most people don't know about it, or many people don't know about it. Why? Because what we see with Trump is that he bets a lot on optics and narrative. This doesn't mean that he's not deporting thousands of undocumented immigrants, but what it means is that in terms of the narrative, how are they pointing that these undocumented immigrants are mostly criminals, or they're promoting some ads of the government that show these images, putting undocumented immigrants, especially Mexicans, under a very dark light. These are the things that differentiate Trump with other administration. Also, Biden, in the last year of his administration, he deported more people than what Trump has deported so far. Just to put it in numbers, The latest number made by Trump's border czar is that around 200,000 people have been deported over 4 months. Biden in the last month was 257,000. Being that said, this doesn't mean this is not significant. Why? Let's say the rhetoric that is being used, it's affecting not only the undocumented immigrants, it's also affecting Hispanics that are already citizens or have permission to live in the US. They feel threatened. Why? Because they feel that they could be stopped arbitrarily by ICE authorities, or simply that the narrative of the government is putting them as second-class citizens. So what we believe is that all this together has sparked this massive protest that you have the undocumented immigrants suffering from these rates, being separated from their families. They were supposed to be deporting undocumented immigrants with criminal records, which is not necessarily happening in all the cases. And you have the citizens who have Hispanic roots or maybe relatives that are undocumented immigrants that feel threatened and go out now to the streets to protest against this. As they were mentioning, the images that we see in TV and pictures is only in localized areas of the protest. Doesn't mean that this is happening in a generalized fashion. So yeah.
Right, which is something that Jessica was saying as well. Ruy, there have been reports that say immigrants contribute tangibly to the US economy. Could you put that into some perspective for us?
Yeah, according to a study from American University, immigrants contribute an estimated $2.3 trillion annually to the US economy, nearly 8% of national GDP, and more than the entire GDP of Canada in 2022. This includes documented and undocumented immigrants. But in the study, they've mentioned that $81 billion were sent in 2022, mostly to Latin America and the Caribbean, which, as I mentioned, most of the undocumented immigrants belong to those regions. They also clarify that they didn't include white-collar immigrants because these people usually have the possibility to integrate or to invite their own relatives to live, and they are not the common senders of remittances. So basically, what the conclusion of this study is that the U.S. economy benefits largely from the work of immigrants, documented and undocumented, and it makes a case study for El Salvador, which population largely are of undocumented immigrants. It says that in 2023 alone, Salvadoran immigrants and their U.S.-born children contributed $223 billion, or about 1% of total U.S. GDP. That's an incredible figure considering the size of El Salvador, which is a very small country.
Right, indeed. Jessica, beyond the public protests against ICE raids over in LA, that is, there were rallies in other parts of the US this past weekend that drew millions, with the slogan being "No Kings." Could you tell us about these particular rallies and their related repercussions?
Well, these were a coordinated effort by the No Kings Coalition, which is a progressive activist coalition that basically was creating an opportunity for Americans across the country to have a sort of release valve to express all of their disenchantment with the current policies of this administration. And of course, Trump has his great fans, his great loyalists, but he also has his great detractors, and this was really an opportunity for them to show up across the country. They showed up in major cities, but also in small towns, protesting particularly the immigration policy of this administration, as well as what's perceived as an expansion of presidential powers. The MAGA wing, or the presidential defense of that, is that they're taking back power from the legislature and the courts that they believe should be rightly in the White House. The counter argument by the people, especially those who protested this past weekend, was that they're taking too much power. This is concentrating power in the hands of a more autocratic dictator-like presidency, and that's where that title of No Kings comes from.
Right, and with regard to the LA protests, Ruy, I understand this also prompted quite a bit of a diplomatic dispute, if you will, between Mexico and the US. Could you tell us a bit about that?
Yes, Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem accused Mexico President Claudia Sheinbaum of fueling violent protests in LA. This was after Mexican president said the following, and I'll quote, "We make a respectful but firm call to the U.S. authorities to carry out all immigration procedures in accordance with due process in a framework of respect for human dignity and the rule of law." This accusation made by Homeland Security Secretary was done in the Oval Office in front of Donald Trump, and quickly the next day, Mexican President Sheinbaum said that it was absolutely false and posted a video of the full statements where she included a clear message where she condemned the violence and disruption in LA protests, disqualifying the use of violence or creating disturbance in these protests. Still, this creates tensions because President Sheinbaum is in a difficult position right now where you have these protests happening in LA and a lot of Mexican citizens involved either in the protestings or in the raids made by ICE. The difficult position here she has is that she has to show a message that she has to protect her citizens, but at the same time, these things are happening in another country, in another territory. Being that said, it was clearly an exaggeration or not even connected what Kristi Noem said about her, and I think it's very clear in the messages that she posted in many of the social platforms. But what she has been saying, on the other hand, is asking for U.S. immigration reform to protect Mexican undocumented immigrants, especially in the sectors of agriculture, services, and manufacturing. These diplomatic tensions seem to have passed. For now, it has cooled down, but there is also a very important element happening since the beginning of the protest. If you see the videos and the pictures, especially the most sensational pictures, when you see cars on fire, you also see people holding Mexican flags. This has been interpreted in two different ways. The people that are against it, they say it's a symbol of an invasion, like a foreign invasion. The people that quote more historical background, they of course mention the large population of Mexicans that are in LA and other states in US. And they also say that the Mexican flag has been used even in the past in other protests in 1994 that were defending immigrants to get access to different social services like health and others. Still, the position of the U.S. administration still has shown some signals that they could take this Mexican symbol as an excuse to direct their, let's say, their negative discourse against specifically Mexicans, which is of high concern in Mexico, of course.
Right, for sure. Jessica, with regard to Mr. Trump's broader immigration policies, what's the latest on birthright citizenship there in the U.S.?
Well, that is the major Supreme Court decision that we are waiting for this week. We could get it as early as hours from now, when the court typically releases its decisions at 10 a.m. Local time. So that's about 6 hours from now. That is basically, there are three major decisions that we're waiting on out of the collection this week. And, today being Thursday, we could get it today, we could get it tomorrow. Birthright citizenship is the constitutional backed guarantee that those who are born on U.S. soil inherently have U.S. citizenship. This goes back to 1898. It was affirmed by the courts then. But in January, Trump signed an executive order trying to end the practice. And basically, the court has to decide if the Trump policy is constitutional. There are arguments on the other side as well. But the main issue here is that the U.S. back in 1965 was 85% white, and it's expected to be a minority country by 2040. And part of the reason for that is people being born on U.S. soil who come from other countries but get citizenship by virtue of being born here. I want to just point out that the U.S. is a nation of immigrants. And so this, again, is a very personal issue to so many. Even people who have been here for generations come from an immigrant heritage. I have Russian ancestry and Swedish ancestry. And so I think it's fair to say that birthright citizenship is personal to most Americans in that way. And so there will likely be an extensive reaction depending on which way this court decision goes this week.
Right. And speaking about immigration, but coming back here to South Korea, we'll end on that note with the domestic question. Ruy, quite a number of pundits here in the country have said that an active immigration policy here in South Korea could be one option to addressing the country's plunging population. What have you been hearing from the new Lee Jae-myung administration with regard to this issue?
Well, specifically from Lee Jae-myung administration, the relation or this proposal hasn't been attended as clearly, but still there's many precedents from the previous administration that it was being taken seriously. The mayor of Seoul mentioned it as a proposal to somehow make more lax, to make it more easy for immigrants to stay in the country long term, to promote the birth rate, because many of these immigrants are young and some of them are marriage immigrants as well, so they already have a partner and they could also apply for citizenships and other things. The vice chair of the Presidential Population Committee from the previous administration urged that immigration be treated as a core policy tool, not just as an option. All this in the context that the incredibly low birth rate of Korea was mentioned by Lee Jae-myung when he was a candidate, but still the part of how would they connect or try to solve this issue through facilitating immigration is still not clear.
Right, I see. So I suppose we'll have to wait and see then. All right, Ruy, as always, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts today. And Jessica over in Washington, D.C., thank you so much for joining us live at this hour with your thoughts.
Good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Right, and on that note, we'll end this edition of Press Perspective. Do join us again same time tomorrow.